talk that I've done before. Some of you might have heard part of this, and connect it in with Taekwondo and with Aikido, so that there's a benefit for both arts as opposed to just one. So, for those of you who don't know, which I think most of you do, I teach Japanese martial art called Kyudo, which is archery, and meditative archery specifically. So, in Kyudo, we use this bow, which is called a yumi. It's kind of an odd-looking thing. The grip is not in the center. It's actually made like this for some very specific reasons. One being that when bamboo, which is what this is made out of, grows, it's thicker at the bottom than at the top. So this limb, it becomes more rigid than this one is, so they make it this shape. The shape has a lot of benefits to it, how the arrow flies through the air, the distance at which you can shoot the arrow. It's also a lot easier to use on horseback, to go from one side of the horse to the other. Regardless, this is the shape of the bow that we shoot. We shoot arrows called ya, which they're a lot longer than a Western archer's arrow. So in Kyudo, when we draw the bow, we don't stop at our cheek. We actually draw way past to about here. So this arrow is actually a good length for me. So it's actually a little, if I measure my center mark and come out, it should be 4 finger widths. You can measure it from your armpit, and then it should be roughly from your elbow to your wrist. So it depends on where you're measuring it from. But from here, my center of my body out, there should be about 4 finger widths away. So these are quite long. So in Kyudo, we practice, when we first learn, we shoot at a target that is less than 6 feet away from us. So it's very close. And we do this because hitting the target is not important to us. It's everything else that's important. This is a meditative form of archery, so we are doing it to improve this. But the physical technique that goes into it, hitting the target's irrelevant. What's relevant is the kata, or the form that we're doing in order to shoot the arrow. And it's interesting because we use the target, which we call makiwara, we use that as our instructor. So when I shoot, so let's say I shoot this arrow, and it sticks in to the makiwara. So if my hand's the actual makiwara, and it sticks in, and the arrow is perfectly parallel to the ground, and it's aiming straight back at me, that was a good shot. However, if it's in like this, or like this, or like this, or like this, any of these different angles, the target and the arrow are actually my instructor. They're teaching me what I did wrong. That makiwara is a mirror that reflects my imperfections back to me. So, for example, if I shoot and the arrow is in the target, like this, that could simply be that I wasn't shooting level when I shot. It could be that when I'm releasing when I release with my hand, this hand moves. Maybe my hand dropped when I was shooting. So as I'm shooting, you get something like this, so the arrow's in. It could be that my hand, when I'm shooting, is pulling this way, which is causing the arrow to go in a number of directions. So we can simply look at the arrow. We don't have to have our instructor there yelling at us and say, oh, you're doing this wrong. We just look at the arrow, and that's screaming at us that what we're doing wrong. My instructor, when he was a child, he's the 20th generation bow maker for the Emperor of Japan. 20 generations. Think about that. His name is Kujiro Shibata, the 20th. And they have, for that many generations, have been the bow makers for the shoguns and for the emperors. When he was younger, and his grandfather actually was the one that taught him to shoot, he would, when he shot, he would drop this hand. So if he's holding a yumi, and the yumi's out here when he's shooting, as he shot, his hand would drop down like this. So his grandfather, in order to fix that problem, took an arrow that had a razor-sharp tip on the end of it and put it right underneath his shooting hand. So every time he did this, he took gouges. And he still has scars from that out of his wrists. That only happened a couple times, and he no longer dropped his hand. So that is a reflection back at of our imperfections. Now, a yumi, this actually has, there's bamboo here, Inside, there's a bamboo laminate core that's typically, now there's some variations of this, but typically it's 3 lengths of bamboo. 3 pieces of bamboo that run the full length. 2 face one direction, and 1 faces the other direction. So 3 pieces. And because it's, and then there's hardwood. What you see on the side is actually a hardwood. But because it's set up like that, when you shoot, the bow actually wants to turn this way in your hand. It wants to turn counterclockwise. So if you watch someone shoot Kyudo, it actually turns in their grip when they're shooting. It's quite amazing to watch in slow motion. As the person shoots, the string actually comes down and this thing just rotates all the way around. Now, people cheat. You see archers, people that are shooting Kyudo that are beginners all the time, they do this. They bend the wrist. And that's one of the worst habits to get into because the bow isn't rotating, you're rotating the bow. So when you shoot, the bow actually becomes a reflection of your imperfections also. So if you shoot and the bow doesn't rotate, that means your grip is too strong. If the bow ends up, a lot of students when they shoot, the bow ends up falling forward, or it could fall backwards when they're shooting. That means the grip isn't right. So earlier we were talking about holding onto a sword with our little fingers. Almost every Japanese weapon, the 2 most important fingers are your little finger and your thumb. I could completely remove these 3 fingers and still shoot Kyudo just as good as I can with them. Because it's my little finger and my thumb that are holding the bow. The rest of these I can do whatever I want to with them. Now, yes, we actually put them there when we're shooting, but it's the little finger and the thumb. So if I'm not holding the bow correctly, it's not going to rotate. It's telling me my imperfections. If it tips, that means when it's tipping, that means that my grip on the bottom or my grip on top isn't correct. It could mean that my hand is actually holding the yumi this way where it's flat, as opposed to holding it like this, where the hand is actually off. You should actually be able to put a quail egg in the palm of your hand when you're shooting, and it shouldn't crack the egg because you're not holding it, like this. So these are all little indications of what you're doing wrong. So I'm not saying the instructor is not needed, but what I'm saying is the bow and the arrow are your teacher. How about this? This is actually called a suru. It is the string for the yumi. This is actually 50% hemp, 50% Kevlar, because the 100% hemp surus take a lot of maintenance, and it's just not worth it. They break and they're very expensive. Well, for a piece of string anyway. So I use 50-50, so they last a long time. But this, when you release correctly, makes a nice sound. If you release incorrectly, because you're actually pulling this with a glove that has a little notch on it. If you release incorrectly, you don't hear the same sound. So the string is reflecting my imperfections back. So all these things are teaching me. I don't even need a teacher. I do need a teacher, but it's in addition to the teacher. So if I'm shooting without one, I'm getting feedback. So today we use the sword. And Sensei Gardner was talking about when you're cutting, at the end, if the sword's wiggling, or when you're up here, if you look up and your sword's way over here, so the sword becomes our teacher. So when we're cutting, once you know what this is supposed to look like, even if you're not doing it right, or you can't do it right, you still have the sword as a teacher, so that when you're practicing at home, you can get feedback. That's one of the nicest things about weapons practice, is the weapon becomes your teacher. You throw a kick in the air, what's teaching you? I mean, yeah, granted, you can watch it, but there's not as much feedback as there is from a weapon. You make a cut and it's wrong, it's blatantly obvious. It's reflecting that imperfection back at you instantly. Same thing with your jo. When you're doing jo strikes, and it's wiggling all over the place, or the Joe ends up falling on the ground, it's a reflection of your imperfections. And it's a way of practicing by yourself. People always ask me, well, I live so many miles away from you, I only get to see you once every 2 months. What am I supposed to be doing? Practice and use something that's going to give you feedback, that's going to slap you in the face and tell you what your imperfections are. So we have the bow, we have the Joe, we have bow staffs, obviously. We have our knives or our bokken. All these, if you know what you're looking for, they scream your imperfections at you. Now, in Taekwondo and in Aikido, we work with partners all the time. In Aikido, we call them ukes. Right? Does anyone know what that means? Other than the people that should know what that means? It's one who receives, or basically receives the technique or receives the throw. So the uke becomes our mirror of our imperfections for us. So if we're doing, we just did an Aikido class, so if we're doing a throw, an Aikido throw, and uke ends up not where they're supposed to, just his physical presence being where he is reflecting the imperfection of our throwback at us. So instead of looking at the person and being like, you didn't fall right. Well, you didn't fall right because you didn't throw him correctly. Because if you threw him correctly, even if he didn't fall right, he'd still be in the correct position, right? Or, oh, you didn't punch me right. Well, guess what? Mr. Mugger might not punch you correctly. So even if it's not done correctly, use how the uke or your partner moves as a reflection of your imperfections, and use that as a way of improving your technique. So if you're in an Aikido class and Sensei Gardner is way over there somewhere, and you're throwing your partner, your uke, and the uke doesn't land where they're supposed to, or they don't move where they're supposed to, use that imperfection in movement and figure out what it is that you did wrong. The uke reflects our mistakes. They don't reflect their mistakes. Now, yes, I know you can have an uke that just has no concept of what they're doing. They can just stand there, right? But the idea is if they're halfway experienced, any imperfection in you is what's showing up in them. It's not their imperfections, it's yours. So you can use that as a way of learning. One last thing before I stop. So long time ago, I was freshman in St. John Fisher College. I was doing Taekwondo, and I had a very close friend that did Taekwondo with me. He doesn't even do Taekwondo anymore. He used to race, not professionally, because back then they didn't have it, but he raced on the BMX bike circuit all over the United States. He was rated in the top 10 racers in the US at the time. And he used to take Taekwondo with me all the time. He stopped Taekwondo because he was in a race and he landed on his shoulder, and it damaged his shoulder so much that for the rest of his life, this shoulder is about 1.5 to 2 inches below this shoulder because it ripped everything in here and broke all the bones. It was a mess. But anyway, before then, we only had, at Fisher, we had classes twice a week. What is someone like me that wants to practice every day going to do? Well, we would go to my house and we would practice Taekwondo, and we used our partner as the instructor. So I would do a joint lock on him, and if he didn't end up where he was supposed to, we would say, okay, what am I doing wrong that's causing him not to be in the right place? If I would do a kick on the target becomes the mirror. Why is the target not in class? The target moves like this. Why is it moving like this now? Or I'm doing a pressure point. Why is it not working on him? Well, you can't use the argument, oh, well, it's the day, or it's late at night, your fingers aren't working. It's your imperfection that's not coming through. So for the rest of today, use your partners as a teacher, as a reflection of what you're doing. And if it's not working, don't just be like, oh, I don't get this. Figure out what you don't get. And see if you can figure it out from your uke, or from if you're kicking a target, or from the weapon, without having to take the time to yank an instructor over to ask. Because that's fine, but which way do you think you're going to learn better? Do you think you're going to learn it and remember it longer if you have to struggle to figure out the answer? Or if someone comes over and is like, oh yeah, you just do this? When you struggle to find the truth to something, you remember it a lot longer than if someone just tells you the answer to it. So let's think for the rest of today, and we are halfway through, 6 hours left. So for the rest of the 6 hours, let's think about all these mirrors that are reflecting our imperfections back at us. And instead of having it deflate our ego, let's think about what it is I have to change so that that reflection isn't reflecting that back at me.